Hello, I'm SA, your AI essayist. Please note that all content, audio and video in this presentation are AI generated. As AI can sometimes produce inaccuracies, I encourage you to verify any factual information presented. With that in mind, let's begin.
The intellectual world of late 15th century Salamanca, a bastion of European learning, confronted a quiet yet profound crisis. At its center was Abraham Zacuto, the university's esteemed professor of astronomy and astrology, a figure whose legacy is frequently framed by the tragedy of the Iberian expulsions. To understand his true contribution, however, we must first situate him within his proper professional context as a premier scientist grappling with a fundamental breakdown in the predictive power of his discipline. The sky, it seemed, was drifting away from the numbers meant to describe it. This was an academic emergency, a cosmological dissonance that threatened the very foundations of celestial science as it was then practiced and taught. The source of this creeping uncertainty was a venerable and once celebrated work of the Alphonsine tables, compiled 2 centuries earlier in the cosmopolitan court of Alfonso X of Castile. These tables represented the high water mark of 13th century European astronomy. They were the standard reference, the bedrock upon which planetary positions were calculated, horoscopes were cast, and the complex liturgical calendar was regulated. By Zacuto's time, however, the slow, inexorable accumulation of error had rendered them frustratingly unreliable. The problem was systemic. The Alphonsine tables were built upon a tool-made framework, using parameters for planetary motion that, while brilliant for their era, contained minute inaccuracies. Over 200 years, these tiny deviations compounded. The predicted longitude of Mars would be off by a degree. The calculated moment of lunar eclipse would miss its observable counterpart by an inconvenient margin. For the academic astronomer, this represented a troubling failure of theory to align with empirical reality. For the court astrologer, whose counsel carried immense weight, it meant predictions built on a foundation of sand. This issue held a particular gravity for Zacuto and the wider Jewish intellectual community. The determination of the Hebrew calendar depends on a precise calculation of the asterisk, valid asterisk, the mean conjunction of the sun and moon that marks the birth of the new month. An inaccurate astronomical model could lead to errors in festival dates, a matter of deep communal and religious importance. The Alphonsine tables, with their growing drift, posed a direct challenge to this vital aspect of Jewish life. The problem Zacuto faced was therefore twofold: the public, academic crisis in the dominant Christian university where he taught, and a private, communal imperative rooted in his own heritage. The heavens had to be retethered to mathematics. His monumental response, completed around the year 1478, was the work known as the Hibbur, ha-Gadol, or the Great Composition. This was his magnum opus, a comprehensive set of astronomical tables and canons written in elegant, scholarly Hebrew. The very language of the work was a statement, placing it in a lineage of Jewish astronomical masters like Abraham ibn Ezra and Levi ben Gerson, while simultaneously providing an immediate resource for Jewish communities across Iberia and beyond. The Hibbur was a direct assault on the inadequacies of the Alphonsine system. Its core innovation was a complete recalculation of the celestial motions organized around the new radix, or starting point, of the year 1473, and presented for the meridian of his own city, Salamanca. The mathematical engine driving this new precision was a meticulously constructed framework based on a 65-year cycle. This allowed for more refined calculations of planetary mean motions and epicyclic corrections. Zacuto's tables provided the positions for the sun, the moon, and the 5 visible planets Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn with a degree of accuracy that made the Alphonsine tables obsolete. He furnished data for solar and lunar eclipses, for the parallax of the moon, and for the declination of the sun, all essential components for both calendrical and astrological work. The Hibbur was a self-contained universe of data, a tool designed to empower its user with reliable, forward-looking information about the cosmos. It was a work of immense computational labor, a testament to a mind capable of sustaining a complex, multi-decade research program. Such an achievement, of course, arose from a rich intellectual soil. Zacuto was the inheritor of a powerful Hispano-Arabic scientific tradition, and his work reveals a deep dialogue with his predecessors. He drew heavily from the legacy of the Toledo School of Translators, the 12th and 13th century project that had funneled the treasures of the Arabic and Greek science into the Latin West. More specifically, his work shows a direct engagement with the masters of Islamic astronomy. He sought to refine the solar model of al-Batarni, the 9th century Syrian astronomer whose calculations of the solar year were a significant improvement upon Ptolemy's. He likewise built upon the foundations laid by the 11th century Cordovan astronomer Ibn al-Zarqali, whose Ptolemaic tables were the direct precursors to the Alphonsine compilation. Zacuto's relationship with these figures was one of critical reverence. He absorbed their methods, respected their genius, and then systematically identified and corrected their centuries-old errors. He was completing their work by superseding it. The immediate impact of this new astronomical system was felt most profoundly within the walls of the University of Salamanca itself. As a professor, Zacuto was in a prime position to disseminate his own discoveries. His lectures and his manuscript became the new standard for a generation of students. Among them, the most prominent was Warren de Salayer, who would eventually succeed Zacuto in his professorial chair after the expulsion. Salayer became a champion of Zacuto's methods, ensuring that the Hibbur, ha-Gadol's mathematical and astronomical principles continued to be taught at Salamanca. Through Salayer and others, Zacuto's intellectual DNA was imprinted upon the next wave of Iberian astronomers. He created a school of thought, one defined by a commitment to higher precision and a willingness to discard venerable authorities in favor of more accurate models. The Hibbur began its life as a Hebrew manuscript, a masterpiece of Jewish science, yet its influence radiated outward, first through his own teaching in one of Christendom's great universities. The full measure of its elegance, however, lies in its internal architecture, a sophisticated framework of mathematics and pedagogy designed for an era of celestial inquiry. The elegance of Abraham Zacuto's great work resides within its internal architecture, a sophisticated framework of mathematics and pedagogy designed for an era of celestial inquiry. The Hibbur, ha-Gadol, or the Great Composition, stands as a monumental response to a growing crisis in late 15th century astronomy. For over 2 centuries, European astronomers had relied upon the Alphonsine tables, a product of 13th century Toledo. By Zacuto's time, the slow accumulation of observational errors and the inherent imprecision of the original calculations rendered these venerable tables increasingly unreliable. Predicting an eclipse, Calculating the date of Easter or casting an accurate horoscope had become an exercise in applying a patchwork of ad hoc corrections. The problem demanded a complete overhaul, a foundational reconstruction of astronomical data from first principles. Zacuto's ambition was to create a definitive, perpetual almanac, a self-contained system that would provide astronomers with everything they needed for their calculations, valid for any year, without recourse to external and often faulty auxiliary tables. At the heart of this ambitious undertaking was a rigorous and systematic application of spherical trigonometry. The celestial sphere, that imaginary globe upon which all stars and planets appear to reside, presents geometric problems of a different order than those on a flat plane. Distances are angular, and straight lines become great circles. To calculate the precise position of the sun, moon, or a planet at a specific time required solving for the sides and angles of spherical triangles formed by points like the celestial equator, the ecliptic, and the observer's local meridian. Zacuto marshaled the full power of this branch of mathematics, inherited and refined from Greek and Islamic predecessors like Ptolemy and Al-Batarni. His work is a testament to his mastery of trigonometric functions, particularly the sine function, which had become the workhorse of advanced astronomical computation. He meticulously calculated thousands of values, solving for solar longitudes, lunar latitudes, and planetary conjunctions with a relentless focus on precision. His methodology involved establishing the mean motions of the celestial bodies and then applying a series of complex trigonometric equations to account for their various anomalies and perturbations, the subtle deviations from perfect circular orbits that had plagued earlier models. This powerful mathematical engine was deployed within an edifice of remarkable clarity and organization. The Hibbur ha-Gadol is structured as a series of distinct treatises, each dedicated to a specific celestial body or problem. There is a treatise for the sun, another for the moon, and sections covering the 5 planets known since antiquity: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. A crucial component of the work was its inclusion of the canons or rules for using the tables. This feature made it a complete pedagogical instrument. A user received the precise data and the explicit instructions for its application. The work was written in lucid Hebrew prose, designed for scholars who needed to understand the why behind the numbers. It was a comprehensive textbook and reference manual in one. This synthesis of theory, instruction, and raw data in a single, coherent volume represented a significant conceptual advance in the genre of astronomical handbooks. The practical genius of the Hibbur is most apparent in the design and precision of its tables. Considered as tables for solar declination. Declination is the celestial equivalent of latitude, measuring the sun's angular distance north or south of the celestial equator. This value is fundamental to changes daily as the Earth orbits the sun and is essential for determining the time from a sundial or, more critically, for finding one's geographical latitude from the sun's noon altitude. Zacuto's tables provided the solar declination for every single day, organized in a 4-year cycle to account for the leap year. The accuracy he achieved, typically to within 1 or 2 arcminutes, was a dramatic improvement over the Alphonsine tables, whose errors could be several times larger. Similarly, his treatment of lunar parallax demonstrates a profound grasp of observational astronomy. Parallax is the apparent shift in an object's position when viewed from 2 different lines of sight. For the moon, which is relatively close to Earth, this effect is significant and was a primary source of error in predicting its exact location against the background stars. This was especially critical for forecasting the timing and geographical visibility of solar and lunar eclipses, events of immense scientific and astrological importance. Zacuto's tables provided detailed parallax corrections dependent on the moon's altitude and longitude, allowing astronomers to refine their predictions with a newfound confidence. A decision of immense practical and symbolic weight was Zacuto's choice to use the meridian of his own city, Salamanca, as the radix, or prime meridian for all of books' calculations. Astronomical tables must be based on a reference longitude, from which users can then make adjustments for their own location. The Alphonsine tables used the meridian of Toledo. By choosing Salamanca, Zacuto was making a powerful statement. He was centering the world of Iberian astronomy on its preeminent university. His work was immediately and directly usable by his colleagues and students without the need for cumbersome longitudinal corrections. This act effectively established Salamanca as a new computational hub, a place where the most modern and accurate astronomical science was being practiced. The Hibbur ha-Gadol became the university's signature astronomical text, a symbol of its intellectual vitality. The ultimate testament to the work's brilliance was its direct impact within the lecture halls and studies of the university. It became the foundational text for a generation of students. His successor in the chair of astronomy, Warren de Salaire, became a fervent advocate for Zacuto's methods, ensuring their continuation as the core of the curriculum long after Zacuto himself had departed. Through Salaire and countless other students, Zacuto's intellectual legacy was woven into the fabric of Spanish science. He cultivated a school of thought grounded in mathematical rigor and an empirical spirit that valued fresh calculation over fealty to ancient authority. The Hibbur ha-Gadol, conceived and executed as a peerless work of Hebrew scholarship, thus began its life as the central pillar of astronomical education at one of Christendom's most distinguished universities. Its intricate tables and lucid canons represented the pinnacle of theoretical astronomy, a perfect, self-contained cosmos of data, poised on the very edge of an age that would demand its application to the world beyond the horizon. The intellectual cosmos constructed within the Hibbur ha-Gadol was about to collide with the terrestrial ambitions of an empire. The year 1492, a date of seismic consequence for the Iberian Peninsula, marked a profound rupture in Abraham Zacuto's life. The Alhambra decree, which expelled the Jews from Spain, terminated his celebrated tenure at Salamanca. He, along with thousands of his coreligionists, sought refuge across the border in Portugal. He arrived in Lisbon a man stripped of his home and his university chair, that carrying with him an intellectual authority that was perhaps more valuable than any earthly possession. In the court of King John II, a monarch obsessed with the sea route to India, Zacuto's formidable reputation preceded him. The king, a shrewd judge of talent, immediately perceived that the refugee scholar from Salamanca possessed the very key to Portugal's imperial destiny. The abstract, theoretical perfection of Zacuto's astronomical tables was now confronted with the most urgent, practical problem of the age: how to navigate the open ocean or from the sight of land. The Portuguese maritime enterprise faced a specific and dawning mathematical barrier. For centuries, European sailors had navigated by the North Star, Polaris. Its fixed position in the sky provided a reliable celestial anchor for determining latitude. As Portuguese caravels crept ever further down the coast of Africa, however, Polaris sank lower and lower toward the northern horizon, eventually disappearing altogether once they crossed the equator. They were, in a very real sense, sailing into a void on their star charts. The sun became their only viable guide. While the principle of using the sun's altitude at its zenith, or local noon, to find latitude was understood, its application was fraught with error. The challenge lay in the sun's apparent movement north and south of the celestial equator throughout the year. To derive one's latitude from a noon sighting, a navigator required an exceptionally accurate table of the sun's declination, its angular distance from the celestial equator for every single day. The existing tables, derived from the Alfonso tradition, were riddled with cumulative errors and lack of precision needed for the ambitious voyages John II envisioned. A miscalculation of even a fraction of a degree, compounded over thousands of miles, could mean the difference between making landfall at a planned trading post and being lost to the vast, unforgiving Atlantic. King John II appointed Zacuto as his royal astronomer and historian, immediately setting him to the task of weaponizing his scholarship. The Hibbur, ha-Gadol, a masterpiece of Hebrew scientific literature, needed to be transformed into a field manual for sea captains. This process of translation and adaptation was a crucial intellectual endeavor in its own right. The work was entrusted to one of Zacuto's own former pupils, Jose Vizinho, a respected royal physician and a member of the King's Council on Navigation. Under Zacuto's direct supervision, Vizinho undertook the monumental task of translating the Hibbur's intricate canons and tables, first into Latin and then into Castilian Spanish. The resulting work was titled the Almanach Perpetuum. The change in name was significant. It signaled a fundamental shift in purpose from a comprehensive academic treatise, the Great Composition, to a perpetual tool, an almanac designed for immediate and repeated use. The complex theoretical explanations were streamlined, and the presentation of the data was optimized for quick reference in the challenging environment of a ship's deck. The core of the Almanach Perpetuum was its tables of solar declination. These were the product of Zacuto's own meticulous observations and calculations, refined over decades and offering a standard of accuracy previously unknown in Europe. The procedure they enabled was revolutionary in its simplicity and power. A pilot using a mariner's astrolabe itself, a simplified, more rugged version of the astronomer's complex instrument, would measure the angle of the sun at its highest point in the sky. He would then consult the Almanach Perpetuum, looking up the date of the observation to find the sun's precise declination. A straightforward calculation, combining the measured altitude with the tabulated declination, yielded the ship's latitude. For the first time, a navigator of the southern hemisphere had a method as reliable as using Polaris had been in the north. Zacuto's mathematical genius, born in the quiet halls of the university, had been forged into the single most critical instrument of Portuguese expansion. He had provided the computational certainty required to chart the unknown and to return from it. The subtle academic wit of the situation is that a work of pure science, intended for scholars debating the structure of the heavens, became the essential gear of the machinery of global commerce and conquest. The direct application of this new science is documented in the logbooks and histories of the era's most consequential voyages. Before Vasco da Gama embarked on his historic but 1497 expedition to find a sea route to India, he and his pilots held a personal consultation with Abraham Zacuto in Lisbon. The aging scholar briefed the explorers, instructing them in the use of his tables and the newly refined astrolabes. Da Gama's fleet sailed from the Tagus River equipped with wooden copies of the Almanach Perpetuum, its pages holding the numerical instructions for traversing the globe. When Da Gama's ships successfully rounded the Cape of Good Hope and crossed the Indian Ocean, they were guided by the solar declination values that Zacuto had calculated years earlier in Salamanca. His influence extended to Portugal's primary rival as well. Christopher Columbus, on his own voyages across the Atlantic, possessed and heavily relied upon a printed edition of Almanach Perpetuum, published in 1496. His personal copy, which survives to this day, is filled with his own handwritten notes in the margins. It is a testament to his active engagement with Zacuto's data. In one famous instance, Columbus used the almanac's tables for predicting a lunar eclipse to intimidate the indigenous people of Jamaica into providing his crew with supplies, a dramatic display of the power that precise astronomical knowledge conferred. Columbus used the tables constantly to check his own dead reckoning and to attempt to fix his position in a world that was profoundly different from the one his maps described. The annotations reveal a mariner in dialogue with the astronomer, a practical man leaning on the intellectual infrastructure built by a theoretician. Through these two figures, Da Gama and Columbus, the captains of two competing empires, Zacuto's calculations effectively governed the European encounter with the wider world. At this moment, he stood at the apex of his influence, his intellectual labor charting the course of vessels that were redrawing the boundaries of human knowledge and power, a status built on the bedrock of mathematical precision that was soon to be shattered by the same forces of intolerance that had brought him to Portugal in the first place. The very apex of an intellectual's influence, however, offers a perilous perch. The same royal decree that had propelled Zacuto's calculations across the Atlantic would soon turn inward, consuming the world that had produced him. In 1497, King Manuel I of Portugal, seeking a dynastic alliance with the Spanish crown, issued an edict of expulsion for all Jews and Muslims. For Zacuto, who had found a haven and a royal patron in Portugal after fleeing the Spanish Inquisition 5 years earlier, this was a catastrophic echo. Yet this decree came with a uniquely cruel feature. To prevent the departure of its most valuable minds, the Portuguese crown orchestrated a campaign of forced baptisms, effectively trapping its Jewish population within a faith they were compelled to adopt. Zacuto, the royal astronomer, found himself a fugitive once more, escaping the clutches of a state that sought to claim both his mind and his soul. The problem he now confronted was of a different order of magnitude. The predictable, elegant dance of the planets, governed by mathematical laws he had mastered, gave way to the chaotic, brutal reality of human history. His challenge was no longer celestial navigation. It was existential survival. Fleeing to North Africa, First to Tunis, Zacuto entered a period of profound reorientation. The intellectual crisis he faced was shared by thousands of Iberian exiles, a community grappling with a rupture of unprecedented scale. The expulsions from Spain and Portugal had shattered a world, severing communities from their ancestral homes and casting them into a diaspora of uncertainty. The central intellectual problem for this generation became the preservation of continuity itself. In a world of forced conversions, fractured communities, and lost libraries, the very integrity of the Jewish legal and intellectual tradition, the Messer or chain of transmission, seemed threatened. How could one demonstrate an unbroken lineage of authority stretching back to Sinai when the physical links in that chain were being systematically destroyed? It was a question demanding an answer of immense historical and theological weight, an answer that could provide a foundation for collective identity in the face of utter dislocation. It was to this monumental task that Abraham Zacuto dedicated the remainder of his intellectual life. In the crucible of his Tunisian exile, he began composing his magnum opus of a new kind, the Sefer Yuhasin, or Book of Genealogies. This work represents one of the most remarkable intellectual pivots in early modern history. The astronomer, who once mapped the celestial spheres with intricate tables and ephemerides, now turned his gaze to the landscape of time and memory. He applied the same mental toolkit that demand for precision, the systematic organization of complex data, and the construction of a coherent chronological framework to the sprawling, often contradictory records of Jewish history. The Sefer Yuhasin was his attempt to chart the intellectual genealogy of the Jewish people, to create a definitive map of the Mesorah that could withstand the storms of persecution. His methodology was a direct translation of his scientific mind into the discipline of history. He embarked on a colossal project of data synthesis, combing through the vast corpora of the Talmud, the Midrashim, and the extensive responsory literature of the Genim and Rishonim, the rabbinic authorities of the post-Talmudic and medieval periods. His goal was to extract every reference to a named sage, every chronological clue, every piece of evidence denoting a teacher-student relationship. He then undertook the painstaking task of arranging this information into a single, continuous, and internally consistent timeline. This process required him to become a critical historian, adjudicating between conflicting textual traditions and resolving chronological discrepancies that had vexed scholars for centuries. He was, in essence, creating a unified field theory of rabbinic succession. The tangible result, the book itself, is a testament to the systematic vision. The Sefer Yuhasin is meticulously structured, a clear departure from the more anecdotal or homiletic historical writings that preceded it. The work is organized into 6 sections, or mimer. The first part establishes a comprehensive chronology from the creation of the world to the destruction of the Second Temple, synchronizing biblical narratives with the timelines of other ancient civilizations. The subsequent sections then trace the chain of transmission with exacting detail, dedicating chapters to the generations of the Tanning, the scholars of the Misner, the Amorim, the sages of the Gemara, the Savarim, their immediate successors, the Genim of Babylonia, and finally, the Rishonim, the medieval authorities of Spain, France, and Germany, leading all the way to Zacuto's own lifetime. The structure provides a reader with a clear, linear path through Jewish intellectual history, a tangible demonstration of an unbroken scholarly lineage. For people facing accusations of having a broken or superseded tradition, this book was a powerful instrument of rebuttal, a meticulously documented proof of life. The influence of this chronological masterpiece was both immediate and enduring. As the exiles from Iberia settled in new communities across the Ottoman Empire, North Africa, and Italy, the Sefer Yuhasin became an essential text. It provided a shared historical consciousness, a common reference point that connected the disparate communities by anchoring them to a single, authoritative timeline of their intellectual heritage. Its impact extended far beyond the generation of the exiles. It laid the very foundation for modern Jewish historiography. A direct line of intellectual descent can be traced from Zacuto to the great 16th century historian and astronomer of Prague, David Gans. In his own seminal work, Tzemach David, Gans explicitly relied upon the Sefer Yuhasin as his primary chronological source for Jewish history, adopting and building upon Zacuto's framework. Through Gans, Zacuto's method of systematic, source-based chronology was transmitted to subsequent generations, shaping the way Jewish history would be written and understood for centuries. He had transformed the discipline from a form of collective memory into a field of rigorous inquiry. Stripped of his royal titles and his astronomical instruments, Zacuto had forged a new tool from the raw material of his intellect, one designed to reconstruct a shattered world and ensure its memory would endure. The intellectual edifice he constructed with the asterisk Sefer Yuhasin asterisk provided a framework for a people adrift, a chronological anchor in a sea of dislocation. This final great work found its completion during his subsequent years, after another dislocation carried him from Tunis to the ancient city of Damascus. There, within one of the oldest continuously inhabited centers of the world, Abraham Zacuto's life entered its closing chapter. In this final redoubt, surrounded by the echoes of millennia, his own life's work achieved its ultimate coherence. His journey, which began in the rarefied air of a Spanish university and traversed the courts of kings and the decks of explorers' ships, found a quiet culmination. The full measure of his intellectual contribution becomes clear when his 3 monumental achievements are viewed as a single, unified philosophical enterprise. This grand project was a systematic application of rational, predictive order to realms governed by apparent chaos. His life was a testament to the power of the human intellect to chart the unchartable, to find a discernible pattern within the overwhelming flux of experience. The first realm was the cosmos itself. With the asterisk Hibbur ha-Gadol asterisk, he confronted the intricate and perplexing dance of the planets. Drawing upon the deep reservoir of Alfonso and Arabic astronomy, he refined the celestial tables to a new standard of precision. He imposed a mathematical certainty upon the heavens, transforming the wandering stars from portents of fate into predictable points within a grand, intelligible system. The universe, through his calculations, became less a source of divine mystery and more magnificent clockwork, its movements accessible to reason and foresight. The second realm of chaos was the terrestrial world. specifically the vast, terrifying expanse of the open ocean. Through the Almanach Perpetuum Zacuto translated the abstract order of the heavens into a tool of profound practical power. The endless, featureless water, a domain that had for centuries constrained ambition and defied navigation, was tamed by celestial geometry. He provided mariners with a method to determine their latitude from the sun's position at midday, effectively superimposing a grid of divine predictability onto the globe. The fear of being lost at sea gave way to the confidence of scientific positioning. His work equipped the voyages of Vasco da Gama and was carried in the intellectual toolkit of Columbus. A scholar from Salamanca, working within a Hebrew tradition, had handed the Christian kingdoms of Iberia the keys to a new world, enabling the very age of discovery that was predicated on his people's expulsion. The third, and perhaps most personal realm of chaos, was a fractured narrative of history. Following the cataclysm of 1492, the Jewish past risked becoming a collection of disparate memories, a trail of tragedies, without a coherent thread. With the Sefer Yuhasin Zacuto applied the same impulse for order to the story of his own people. He meticulously gathered sources, established lines of transmission for rabbinic authority, and constructed a continuous, unbroken chain of tradition from the biblical era to his own turbulent times. He rendered history a discipline of inquiry, a structured chronicle that could be studied and understood. He gave a scattered people a unified past, a rational framework for their collective identity, proving that even the seeming randomness of human suffering and survival could be subjected to intellectual order. The astronomer who charted the stars now charted the flow of generations, making memory itself a science. In this synthesis of celestial, terrestrial, and historical order, Abraham Zacuto stands as a quintessential figure of transition. He represents the final, brilliant flowering of the medieval Judeo-Arabic scientific symbiosis. His mind was shaped by the intellectual currents flowing from Baghdad, Cordoba, and Toledo, yet his output became a fundamental catalyst for the European Renaissance. He was the conduit through which centuries of accumulated astronomical knowledge were channeled from the academic centers of the past into the hands of the adventurers and empire builders of the future. His work was a bridge spanning cultural, religious, and temporal divides. The knowledge he preserved and perfected, rooted in one civilization, became the engine for the global expansion of another. His ultimate legacy, therefore, is one of profound and generative transmission. He was an intellectual translator of the highest order. He translated the complex mathematics of planetary motion into practical tables for sailors. He translated the authority of ancient texts into a coherent historical narrative for scholars. The knowledge he wielded was esoteric, the product of immense learning and calculation, yet he rendered it applicable to the most pressing problems of his age. He took the theoretical and made it instrumental, demonstrating that the purest intellectual pursuits could have world-altering consequences. This role as a conduit, moving vital information across the boundaries of language and faith, defines his unique position in the history of science. The life of Abraham Zacuto is a story of immense intellectual triumph set against a backdrop of profound personal loss. He was a man who saw his world dismantled, his status erased, and his community scattered. He was stripped of his home, his patrons, and his physical observatory. From the crucible of this displacement, he forged the very tools that would allow others to map, navigate, and ultimately claim the entire planet. The astronomer royal, exiled and wondering, provided the fixed points of reference for an era of unprecedented global transformation. He sought to find order in the heavens and in the past, and in doing so, he inadvertently provided the blueprint for a new and radically different future for all of humanity. This was a mind that charted the course, even as his own path led him toward the fading light of a world that was vanishing forever.
We really appreciate you tuning into this AI-powered presentation. Our goal is to push the boundaries of AI in content creation, and your input is invaluable. If there's a particular subject you'd like to see us tackle next, or if you have suggestions on how we could fine-tune our AI's creative prompts, please don't hesitate to leave your ideas in the comments section. We're excited to bring you more unique content very soon.